Welcome back, focused learners. Today, we're jumping right into an explainer that completely flips how we look at biology. Instead of treating cancer like some random, unpredictable genetic accident, we're exploring a fascinating proposition from the source material that it's actually a strict mechanical failure. We're going to break down type 1 popcorn cancer as a pure problem of geometry, pressure, and structural boundaries using the All That's Holy, or ATH system. Here is our structural blueprint for today. We'll start with the ATH system, move to the hyperdense pressure cage, then critical mass and popcorning before covering the three solutions: lift with a hypobaric vacuum, dissolve to break the cage, and spark with IV velocity. Let's start right off with part 1, the All That's Holy system. To really grasp this, we have to entirely shift our perspective. You need to treat the human body and even a single living cell exactly like a mechanical engine, one that's governed by rigid structural limits, torque, and hydrostatic pressure. In this All That's Holy framework, everything from a massive universe down to a tiny biological cell operates on a strict, predictable mechanical cycle of curvature and tension. Basically, a cell is like a miniature breathing universe. It has to cycle through accumulating mass, splitting apart, and then resetting. Now, a crucial concept in this system is how it completely redefines infinity. In traditional math, sure, infinity is just an endless, abstract number. But in the ATS system, infinity, which is often referred to as critical mass, is a very real, very hard physical boundary. It's the exact moment a system hits its absolute maximum capacity. A cell simply can't grow forever. When it hits this critical mass limit, it is structurally forced into action, which usually means dividing cleanly into two new cells. Moving on to section 2, the hyperdense pressure cage. So what happens to that mechanical cycle when the environment around the cell becomes a trap? Picture hyperdense, healthy-looking muscle mass suddenly acting like a crushing vice. In a normal, healthy state, as a cell approaches critical mass, it stretches out into a nice figure-8 shape. It executes what's called a clean pinch right at the center, the central nexus, and snaps apart. But in type 1 cancer, often seen with extreme hyperdense muscle mass, the surrounding tissue is packed as tight as concrete. This creates immense external solid stress. The cell stretches into that figure 8, but that concrete cage literally forbids the central nexus from pinching. The division is physically blocked by localized hydrostatic pressure. Which brings us to the climax in section 3, critical mass and popcorning. Let's track the microsecond stages of this failure, because it's basically like watching a mechanical disaster unfold in slow motion. First, mass is added as the cell preps to divide. Second, it stretches into the figure 8. Third, we hit the nexus lock, where that external muscle vice totally blocks the split. And here is where physics takes over. The cell keeps accumulating internal tension, driving right up to stage 4, critical mass, or infinity. But remember, it's locked. There is no relief valve, which leads inevitably to stage 5, a catastrophic blowout. The ATH system calls this popcorn cancer, specifically type 1, because the cell was physically crushed from the outside and forbidden from splitting. The internal tension spikes right into the infinity ceiling. The container just can't hold the torque anymore, and it violently popcorns. It shatters its boundaries and warps into a jagged, multinucleated tumor. It's totally vital to understand that it doesn't mutate randomly here. It deforms because it was trapped in a pressure cage. While traditional medicine might look at that deformed cell and blame a genetic accident, the All That's Holy system dictates a brilliant, purely mechanical solution. If the problem is a hydrostatic lock, we need mechanical countermeasures. 3 steps: lift the cage, break the cage, and speed the engine. Let's look at that first step in section 4, lift, using a hypobaric vacuum chamber. Our first intervention relies on an absolutely crucial distinction. You might immediately think of a hyperbaric chamber, but adding gas pressure is actually incredibly dangerous for type 1 cancer. Adding external pressure to a cell that's already trapped in a hyperdense vice will instantly shove it over the critical mass threshold, forcing a deadly popcorn blowout. We definitely don't want that. Instead, we use a hypobaric chamber. By pumping ambient air out, we create a negative pressure void. This acts like a gentle, invisible winch, pulling outward from 360 degrees to literally lift that crushing solid stress right off the deep capillary beds. Next up, section 5, dissolve, to break the cage. Even with the negative pressure lifting the surrounding tissues, the cell itself is still stuck inside a hardened matrix. So the protocol brings in matrix dissolvers. Through localized microinjections of enzymatic tissue thinning agents, specifically hyaluronidase, combined with targeted buffers, we are literally melting away that rigid scar tissue and dense collagen cage. This drastically lowers the external hydrostatic counterpressure, finally physically unlocking that central nexus and giving those squash cells the room they desperately need to breathe without shattering. And finally, Section 6, the SPARC, or IV Velocity Protocol. Once the external vise is lifted and the concrete is dissolved, we have to internally reinforce the cell's engine. Because if we don't fix the internal timing, the cell might just stall, swell, and popcorn all over again. When a cell gets crushed by muscle mass, its local blood vessels squeeze shut. It gets starved of oxygen, its internal engine lags, and it swells outward against the pressure. To stop this, we have to manipulate its internal clock speed and get the electron flow moving perfectly. To pull this off, the ATH system uses the IV Velocity SPARC, a daily low-dose IV infusion of methylene blue. And this is a real game changer. Methylene blue acts as an independent electron shuttle right in the mitochondria, completely bypassing the oxygen bottleneck from those squeezed blood vessels. It accelerates the cell's internal clock rate so fast that the cell doesn't lag or swell at all. It stays small, tight, and highly efficient. By keeping that internal velocity high, the cell basically becomes immune to the crushing weight of the muscle grid. It simply refuses to ever hit that popcorn threshold. But how do we make sure this structural failure never happens in the first place? Well, the ATH system mandates a specific preventative measure, a 15% body fat baseline. In this framework, subcutaneous fat is not just stored energy, it's a mandatory liquid shock absorber. If someone with massive muscles drops their body fat too low, there's zero dampening against the rigid force of their own expanding muscle. A 15% fat envelope absorbs that mechanical strain and dampens the solid stress before it can ever crush those delicate cells into critical mass. By looking at the human body as a mechanical engine, the All That's Holy system transforms a terrifying disease into a completely solvable equation of pressure and geometry. We lift the cage with a vacuum, we dissolve the concrete with enzymes, and we spark the engine with velocity. It is a wildly different paradigm, and honestly, it leaves us with a pretty profound question. If we can reverse something as complex as popcorn cancer using vacuums, dissolvers, and velocity sparks, what other medical mysteries are just mechanical engineering problems waiting for the right tool? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, everyone. Keep questioning the boundaries.